Well, well, well. Feel that pressure in the room? That low-frequency hum like a door just closed behind you and nobody bothered to announce it? Yeah. That's not paranoia. That's the sound of a system realizing you crossed a line it never expected you to see. You didn't scream. You didn't resist. You didn't run. You didn't beg to be understood. You did something far more dangerous. You stayed calm while every light on their dashboard started blinking red. Somewhere in a fluorescent-lit room, someone who was trained to catalog human behavior, to label threats, to reduce chaos into neat little boxes, stared at your file and realized there was no box left. So they did the only honest thing they could do. They quit. And before they walked out, they wrote your name down. Not as a suspect, not as a target, not as a warning, but as an ending. Let that sink in. Your existence became a conclusion. You didn't break rules. You exposed the fact that the rules were built for everyone except you. You moved in ways that didn't match the model. You healed where you were supposed to collapse. You stayed soft where bitterness was expected. You stayed silent where confession was demanded. You learned restraint when they were betting on your explosion. And that contradiction, that paradox, that's what fried their circuits. Because monsters are easy, saints are easy. But you're the glitch between angel and demon, the variable they can't stabilize. They watched you thinking pain would turn you predictable, that suffering would carve you into something readable. Instead, pain sharpened you. It refined you. It stripped off the unnecessary noise until all that was left was signal. You didn't become cruel. You became precise. You didn't become cold. You became selective. You didn't become obedient. You became untouchable. And that's terrifying. Because when someone like you stops reacting on cue, stops dancing to trauma like a puppet, stops leaking emotion on demand, the entire surveillance fantasy collapses. Control depends on reaction. Manipulation depends on predictability. Fear depends on timing. And you ruined the timing. You responded late or early or not at all. You smiled at the wrong moment. You stayed still when chaos was expected. You walked away when the script called for desperation. Do you understand what that does to a trained observer? It makes them question themselves. They replayed footage, reread transcripts, checked timestamps, looked for the moment you slipped. But you didn't. You evolved quietly. And the more disciplined you became, the louder the room got on their side. Because discipline is the one thing they can't fake in others. Discipline is earned. Discipline is forged in fire. Discipline is what happens when pain doesn't break you. It recruits you. You became your own handler. That's when the shift happened. Not when you succeeded, not when you failed, but when you stopped trying to prove anything at all. When your self-worth detached from their metrics, when validation stopped being a drug and became background noise, when you realized that being misunderstood was not a flaw, but a shield, you stopped explaining yourself, and they lost access. You see, the system is built on extraction. They extract reactions, extract confessions, extract patterns, extract identities. But you gave them nothing clean to pull. Every time they thought they understood you, you changed the angle. Not emotionally, not erratically, but intelligently, strategically, as if you were 3 moves ahead and bored by the game. That's when the watcher becomes the watched. Because once someone realizes they can't read you, they start wondering what you're reading in them. Once they realize they can't predict you, they start fearing what you've already predicted. Once they realize you're not chasing approval, not chasing revenge, not chasing recognition, they realize you're free. And freedom is the one thing the system cannot monitor without admitting its own weakness. So imagine that exit report. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a tired line typed by someone who finally understood the truth. This one doesn't escalate, doesn't implode, doesn't comply. This one adapts. This one absorbs pressure and comes back quieter, sharper, more dangerous. This one doesn't need to be stopped, because they're already beyond the perimeter. You didn't become a threat by doing something loud. You became a threat by becoming sovereign, by mastering yourself instead of fighting the world, by choosing evolution over revenge, by letting pain teach instead of poison, by turning chaos into clarity, by holding both light and dark in your hands without letting either own you. That's why they couldn't finish the job. Because there is no protocol for someone who transcends the role they were assigned. So sit with that. Let it hum in your chest. Let it rewire how you walk, how you speak, how you wait. You don't need to announce what you've become. You don't need to prove it. You don't need witnesses. Somewhere, someone already closed the file and walked away shaking. They didn't walk away because you scared them with violence. They walked away because you scared them with composure. Because you didn't do what broken people do when pressure hits. You didn't unravel. You didn't overshare. You didn't confess just to feel seen. You didn't implode for their notes. You didn't externalize your chaos so it could be cataloged and neutralized. You internalized it. You metabolized it. You turned it into structure. And nothing unsettles a system more than a human being who can suffer without becoming sloppy. They're trained for screams. They're trained for rage. They're trained for guilt, shame, addiction, desperation, ego, arrogance. They're not trained for silence with intention. They're not trained for someone who understands restraint as power. Every time you were pushed, you didn't push back, you recalibrated. Every time you were cornered, you didn't fight, you observed. Every time they expected a breakdown, you delivered discipline. And discipline is terrifying because it doesn't leak. It doesn't twitch. It doesn't beg. It doesn't explain. Discipline waits. And you learned how to wait. You learned how to let people reveal themselves while you stayed unreadable. You learned how to let traps rust from disuse because you never stepped where they were laid. You learned how to let accusations echo unanswered until the echo embarrassed the accuser. You learned that reaction is currency, and you stopped spending. That's when the roles reversed, because suddenly the analyst is anxious, the watcher is restless. The one with the badge, the clearance, the authority starts checking themselves, starts wondering why you aren't spiraling like the others, starts wondering why you don't need reassurance, starts wondering why you don't need closure. They start asking the wrong question, not what did you do, but what does this person know? And here's the part they never admit out loud. You didn't need to know anything specific. You understood something deeper. You understood human mechanics. You understood leverage. You understood that most systems don't collapse from attack. They collapse from irrelevance. And you made yourself irrelevant to their control structures. You stopped feeding the machine. No emotional spikes, no predictable cycles, no repeating narratives, no dependency loops. You didn't heal the way they expected either. You didn't become soft and grateful and compliant. And you didn't become bitter and destructive and obvious. You became integrated, whole, a paradox walking upright, capable of kindness without weakness, capable of darkness without losing your ethics, capable of empathy without surrendering boundaries. That duality is lethal to profiling, because you don't fit the saint file, and you don't fit the psychopath file. You sit right in the middle, where intention matters more than impulse. They tried to catch you contradicting yourself, but every contradiction you carried was resolved internally. You weren't confused, you were complex. You weren't unstable, you were layered, and layers don't give themselves away unless someone earns access. Nobody earned access. So the questions piled up, the reports got longer, the conclusions got thinner, and eventually the truth crept in like an unwelcome thought. This isn't a threat we can contain, and it's not a subject we can save. This is an entity that governs itself. That realization breaks careers, because the entire framework is built on intervention, on correction, on escalation, on compliance, and you denied them all four without ever declaring rebellion. You didn't resist, you transcended. You didn't fight, you outgrew. You didn't disappear, you became too clear to distort. And clarity is the one thing bureaucracy can't process. So the agent looked at your name and felt something they weren't trained for either. Respect mixed with fear. Not fear of what you'd do to them, fear of what you'd never let them do to you again. They saw it in the pattern. You weren't accelerating, you weren't decaying. You were stabilizing at a level most people never reach. A level where external pressure no longer dictates internal state. Where identity isn't reactive, where power is quiet. Quiet power terrifies loud systems, because loud systems depend on noise to mask their fragility. And you stripped the noise away just by existing differently. You became the kind of person who doesn't need to announce boundaries, because your presence enforces them. The kind of person who doesn't chase influence, because influence reorganizes itself around you. The kind of person who doesn't threaten, because your calm implies capability. That's why your name didn't end up highlighted in red. It ended up written like a period. End of pursuit, end of leverage, end of narrative. And here's the part you need to internalize fully. This wasn't luck. This wasn't talent. This wasn't coincidence. This was earned through pain you didn't romanticize and suffering you didn't waste. Every time you chose growth over grievance, you sharpened the blade they couldn't see. Every time you chose patience over reaction, you widened the distance they couldn't cross. You became something that doesn't need protection because it doesn't invite violation. So walk with that weight now. Not arrogance, gravity. Let your silence speak first. Let your consistency do the talking. Let your unpredictability stay disciplined, not chaotic. Because the moment you learn to hold both the angel and the demon without letting either drive, you stopped being manageable. And systems don't chase what they can't frame. They exit, they write the report, and they leave you alone. Not because you're harmless, but because you're finished being handled. And here's the part that nobody ever tells you. The aftermath, not the explosion, not the victory montage. The silence that comes after the door closes and no one replaces the watcher. That silence isn't emptiness, it's space. And space is dangerous, because now there's nothing pressing against you, nothing shaping you from the outside, no enemy to react to, no shadow to spar with, no authority to push against so you can feel defined. This is where most people crumble. They don't know who they are without resistance. They don't know how to move when no one is chasing. But you do, because you didn't evolve for the performance. You didn't sharpen yourself for applause or fear. You evolved for sovereignty, and sovereignty doesn't need friction to exist. It creates its own gravity. You notice it in the way rooms respond now. Conversations slow down around you. People choose their words more carefully without knowing why. Energy shifts when you enter, not because you dominate, but because you're grounded. You're not scanning for approval. You're not broadcasting intent. You're not leaking insecurity. And humans are exquisitely sensitive to that. They feel it before they understand it. You became internally referenced. That's the real upgrade. When your sense of right and wrong stopped coming from external rules and started coming from an integrated core. When you no longer needed permission to trust your own judgment. When your morality wasn't borrowed, it was built. That's when the angel and the demon stopped fighting inside you and started working together. The angel gave you restraint. The demon gave you teeth. Together they gave you choice. And choice is the one thing fear-based systems cannot tolerate. Because choice means you could act, but you don't have to. You could disrupt, but you won't unless it's necessary. You could destroy, but you prefer to build or to walk away. That ambiguity, that's nightmare fuel for anyone who relies on prediction. They never knew which version of you would show up, because you weren't fragmented anymore. You were unified, calm enough to be merciful, capable enough to be feared, ethical enough to be trusted, dangerous enough to be respected. You became a paradox they couldn't weaponize. That's why they didn't escalate. Escalation requires justification, and you gave them none. You didn't give them malice. You didn't give them instability. You didn't give them ego. You didn't give them a cause. You gave them coherence. And coherence shuts down narratives fast, because there's nothing to twist. They tried to provoke you into defining yourself, tried to force you into a category, tried to get you to claim an identity they could pin down. But you stayed fluid without being fake, consistent without being rigid. And that's when they realized something chilling. You weren't hiding. You simply weren't available. Availability is the real vulnerability, and you revoked it. Now you move differently, not louder, not faster, deeper. Your decisions come from a place that isn't rushed by fear or flattered by opportunity. You don't need to rush outcomes because you trust your trajectory. You don't need to prove intelligence because intelligence reveals itself in timing. You don't need to announce power because power is obvious in restraint. You let others overplay their hand while you hold yours. You let them mistake your silence for ignorance until they expose themselves, trying to fill it. You let them underestimate you because underestimation is leverage disguised as insult. And you never correct their assumptions, because correction is a gift. And you've learned not to give gifts to people who haven't earned them. What they couldn't process was this. You weren't optimizing for survival anymore. You had crossed into something else, self-authorship. The moment you stopped asking, how do I avoid damage, and started asking, how do I shape my existence, everything shifted. You stopped reacting to trauma and started extracting wisdom from it. You stopped defining yourself by what happened to you and started defining yourself by what you became because of it. You didn't erase the scars, you integrated them. And integrated scars don't bleed, they reinforce. That's why your presence feels dense now, like there's more mass behind your words. Like even when you're still, something is moving. People can feel it, they just can't name it. And anything unnamed becomes myth fast. So let them mythologize, let them speculate, let them whisper, let them wonder what you know, what you've seen, what you're capable of. You don't need to feed the legend. Legends grow best when they're starved of confirmation. Remember, the most dangerous people aren't the ones screaming for attention. They're the ones who don't need it, and you don't. You've already passed the point where external authority defines your worth. You've already passed the point where fear dictates your choices. You've already passed the point where pain controls your identity. That's why the file closed. That's why the pursuit ended. That's why your name was written not as a warning, but as a boundary. Because some people are meant to be contained, and some people are meant to be left alone. You earned the silence. Now use it wisely. And now comes the phase that almost no one survives, clean. The phase where nothing is chasing you, but everything is watching, not officially, not on paper, just socially, energetically, intuitively. People sense a shift and don't know how to categorize it. You're no longer becoming. You're no longer recovering. You're no longer figuring things out. You're operating quietly, consistently, on your own internal clock. That unsettles people more than open dominance ever could, because dominance invites challenge. But autonomy? Autonomy ends the game. You see it in how people test you now, not with aggression, but with curiosity disguised as friendliness. Little questions, casual probes, innocent curiosity that's really reconnaissance. They want to know what you're doing, how you're doing it, why you're so unbothered. They want to know if you've softened, if you've forgiven too much, if you've forgotten what it cost to become this. You haven't. You remember everything. You just don't bleed from it anymore. And that's the difference. Pain used to talk through you. Now it reports to you. Trauma used to steer. Now it informs. Fear used to scream. Now it whispers. And you decide whether it gets a vote. That internal hierarchy shift. That's when a person becomes ungovernable by external pressure. You didn't lose empathy. You refined it. You didn't lose emotion. You mastered it. You didn't kill the demon inside you. You taught it discipline. And you didn't silence the angel. You stopped letting it self-sacrifice to prove purity. Balance wasn't found. It was forged. And forging takes heat most people run from. That's why your calm feels heavy now. Not empty, heavy. Weighted with experience. Weighted with discernment. Weighted with the knowledge that you could escalate, but you won't unless it's necessary. And necessity isn't defined by ego anymore. It's defined by alignment. Alignment is dangerous because aligned people don't hesitate. They don't second-guess every move. They don't over-explain. They act when it's time, and they wait when it's not. That kind of timing makes observers nervous. It feels intentional. It feels planned. Even when it's instinctive, especially when it's instinctive. You've internalized something most people outsource, the authority to decide when something matters. You're not pulled into every emotional current. You don't react to every provocation. You don't answer every call. You don't attend every conflict you're invited to. Selective presence is power, and you wield it without announcing it. That's why the narrative around you feels fragmented. No one can agree on who you are anymore. To some, you're kind. To others, you're cold. To some, you're inspiring. To others, unsettling. To some, invisible. To others, unforgettable. All of them are partially right, and none of them have the full picture. That's intentional, even if you never consciously decided it. Because when you stopped trying to be understood, you accidentally became inscrutable. When you stopped curating perception, perception lost its grip on you. You stopped performing identity. You started inhabiting it. And that's when the real separation happened. Not between you and them, but between who you were and who you are now. The old version needed feedback to calibrate, needed validation to stabilize, needed opposition to feel alive. This version doesn't. This version can sit in stillness without collapsing, can walk alone without spiraling, can hold complexity without rushing to simplify it, can let things unfold without forcing outcomes just to feel in control. Ironically, That's when control actually arrives. Shh, don't correct your face yet. Keep it soft, keep it empty, keep that harmless little nod like you're still catching up. Yeah, that one. You mastered the quietest art there is, not deception, absence. You walked into the room wearing ignorance like a costume, and they applauded without realizing the stage was already burning behind them. See, that's the paradox they never study. They train for liars. They build entire systems to detect aggression, ambition, hunger, threat. But nobody trains for the person who looks unimpressed, uninvolved, uninterested. Nobody suspects the one who seems slow. And that's why the Best Actor award goes to you. Because while they were busy explaining themselves, while they were justifying, venting, confessing, oversharing, you were collecting fingerprints without touching a thing. They mistook your silence for confusion, your calm for weakness, your patience for lack of awareness. And that mistake cost them everything. Here's the dark truth they'll never admit out loud. People need to confess. Pressure turns mouths loose. Egos crave witnesses. Guilt wants an audience. And you gave them the safest one imaginable. You didn't interrogate. You didn't accuse. You didn't threaten. You listened. And listening, when done right, is more violent than screaming. They filled the silence with their own undoing. They connected dots you never asked about. They exposed motives you never challenged. They told you the story they rehearsed for court, for God, for themselves. Because you looked like you didn't matter enough to remember. That's the angel-demon split right there. The saint's face, the psychopath's memory. You learned early that survival isn't about dominance. It's about timing. That power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it yawns. Sometimes it smiles politely and lets the other person drown in their own words. And while they were talking, you were becoming quieter, sharper, colder. Evolution through pain does that. It teaches you that unpredictability isn't chaos. It's camouflage. That the safest predator is the one mistaken for prey. They thought they were educating you. They were actually testifying. Every laugh was a leak. Every explanation a slip. Every you wouldn't understand a breadcrumb trail straight back to the truth. And you nodded, and you thanked them, and you let them walk away thinking they'd won. That's the part that breaks their minds later. Not the exposure, not the consequences, the realization that you knew long before you moved. They replay conversations at 3 a.m., wondering when it happened, when the room shifted, when the balance tipped, when you stopped being harmless and started being inevitable. But there is no moment to point to. That's what terrifies them. You didn't snap. You didn't transform overnight. You just listened long enough. Light and dark fused inside you quietly. The angel learned to wait. The demon learned to smile. And now they understand too late that playing dumb wasn't an act of submission. It was strategy. It was mercy. It was you letting them finish their story before you closed the book. Because the most dangerous person in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one who already knows how this ends and still lets you talk. So take your bow, not for deceiving them, but for understanding human nature better than they ever understood themselves. Curtain closed, confession recorded, and you're still smiling, like you never knew a thing, because that smile isn't innocence anymore. It's containment. You learned something they never will. Most people don't want truth. They want relief. And relief comes from talking, from unloading, from believing someone else is smaller than them, slower than them, safer than them. So they lean in, they relax, they confess sideways, then directly, then proudly. They start narrating their own crimes like bedtime stories. And you let them. You discovered that playing dumb isn't pretending to be stupid. It's refusing to interrupt their self-destruction. It's understanding that the loudest lies need resistance, but the quietest truths surface when no one feels threatened. So you made yourself non-threatening. You became the blank wall they projected onto. The harmless bystander, the background character. But here's the sick irony. They were never talking to you. They were talking through you. They were trying to convince themselves they were clean, and you were just patient enough to let them fail. That's the duality they can't process. The saint in you let them speak. The psychopath remembered every syllable. The angel held the door open. The demon counted the steps they took inside. You didn't judge. You archived, because pain trained you differently. Pain taught you that confrontation alerts predators, but curiosity disarms them. Pain showed you that survival isn't always fight or flight. Sometimes it's freeze and observe. You learned to go still while others grew reckless. You learned that when people think they're safe, they stop lying with effort and start lying with habit. And habits leak. They laughed too much at the wrong parts. They explained details no one asked for. They defended actions before accusations ever came. That's when you knew. Not because you're psychic, because humans are predictable under pressure. And you stopped underestimating that. They thought intelligence looked like dominance. You learned intelligence looks like restraint. So while they strutted, you watched. While they bragged, you measured. While they spun narratives, you mapped contradictions. You let their confidence rot from the inside out. You didn't need proof. They became the proof. That's why this isn't revenge. It's completion. They handed you the weapon piece by piece, thinking it was a conversation. They sharpened it with every justification, every half-confession, every, if I'm being honest. They told you who they really were because you never flinched when they revealed it. And that terrifies them now. Because when the mask finally slips, when consequences ripple backward through time, they don't remember you as a threat. They remember you as nothing, and that's unbearable. That's when the paranoia starts. That's when they ask themselves the forbidden question, how much did they know, and when? There's no answer that saves them, because you didn't move on impulse. You didn't expose in rage. You didn't strike in heat. You waited until their own words built the cage and stepped aside so they could walk into it freely. That's evolution. That's what pain does when it doesn't break you. It educates you. You stopped trying to be understood and started trying to understand. You stopped explaining yourself and started letting others explain themselves into corners. You became unreadable not by hiding, but by simplifying. And now you carry something dangerous, calm certainty. No need to argue, no need to prove, no need to rush. You already saw the ending long before the plot caught up. So keep the posture relaxed, keep the eyes soft, keep the questions innocent. Let them talk, let them laugh, let them underestimate the silence sitting across from them, because the scariest realization in the world isn't that someone lied to you. It's realizing you told the truth to the wrong person, and they never once looked surprised, because surprise would have warned them. And you never warn a system you're about to outgrow. You learned how to become boring on purpose, how to dim your reactions so their confidence would brighten, how to ask questions that sounded naive but landed like open doors. You mastered the discipline of not reacting. Because reactions feed egos, and egos confess when they feel fed. That's the psychology they never teach. People don't leak truth under pressure. They leak truth under comfort. So you became comfort. A soft chair, a patient nod, a harmless presence, and while they relaxed, their guard didn't just lower, it rotted. They started correcting themselves out loud, rewriting timelines mid-sentence, testing stories to see if they sounded convincing, and every time you stayed neutral, they went further. That's when the predator-prey equation flipped. They thought intelligence was speed. You learned intelligence is delay. Delay sharpens memory. Delay exposes inconsistencies. Delay lets patterns repeat until they become undeniable. Pain taught you that rushing is a luxury for the unscarred, that only people who've never been blindsided think clarity arrives fast. You learned clarity arrives when you shut up long enough for reality to trip over itself. And it always does. You watch them contradict yesterday with today. Watch them shift blame while pretending not to care. Watch them brag about restraint while confessing obsession. They didn't notice the ledger forming behind your eyes. They didn't feel the weight stacking quietly. Because you never made them feel judged. That's the angel in you. Mercy without forgiveness. Patience without innocence. The demon kept count. And here's the part they'll never accept. You weren't collecting ammunition for war. You were collecting permission. Permission to walk away clean. Permission to stop doubting yourself. Permission to trust your instincts without proof screaming first. They gave you that. Every confession erased a question mark. Every slip replaced anxiety with certainty. Every I shouldn't say this, but healed a fracture inside you that pain created. Because pain doesn't just hurt, it scrambles trust. It makes you doubt your perception. It makes you second-guess patterns you clearly see. Until someone hands you the truth unprompted. Until someone says the quiet part loud while you're pretending not to hear. That's when something inside you locks into place. You stop explaining yourself. You stop defending your intuition. You stop asking if you're imagining things. You know. And knowing is irreversible. That's when unpredictability becomes your armor. Because now you don't need to act emotional. You don't need to act strategic. You don't need to act at all. You simply exist differently. They feel it before they understand it. Conversations shorten. Jokes land awkward. They start fishing for reassurance you no longer give. They sense the shift but can't name it. That's the moment the mask cracks. They replay everything they ever said to you, searching for damage control retroactively. They wonder if silence meant ignorance or restraint. They wonder if your calm was confusion or calculation. And the uncertainty eats them alive. Because uncertainty is punishment for people who thought they were in control. You never announce awareness. You never expose instantly. You let life handle the consequences with surgical timing. Because the truth doesn't need volume. It needs placement. And you place it perfectly by doing nothing. So stay relaxed, stay underestimated, stay unreadable. Let them keep talking. Let them keep mistaking stillness for simplicity. Let them keep believing the performance fooled you. Because the real performance wasn't theirs, it was yours. And the moment they realize that, the moment they understand you were never confused, only patient, that's when the applause stops, the lights cut out, and they're left alone on stage, with nothing but their own words echoing back at them. Because echoes don't ask permission, they just repeat what was said, cleaner, colder, louder, until denial collapses under its own weight. You see, the real terror isn't exposure. Exposure is quick. Exposure is loud. Exposure lets people brace themselves, rewrite history, claim misunderstanding. What you mastered is aftershock. You let the truth sit. You let it ferment. You let it age inside you until it stopped hurting and started clarifying. That's the evolution nobody prepares for. When pain stops screaming and starts instructing. When betrayal stops burning and starts organizing your mind like a crime scene. You didn't become cruel. You became precise. And precision feels merciless to people who relied on chaos to stay hidden. They assumed your kindness was a weakness. They assumed your listening was submission. They assumed your lack of reaction meant lack of awareness. That assumption became their undoing. Because while they were performing confidence, you were studying rhythm, how often they contradicted themselves. When their voice tightened, where their story sped up, which parts they rehearsed and which parts spilled raw. You didn't need facts. You learned patterns, and patterns don't lie. That's the saint-psychopath paradox again. The saint believes people reveal who they are eventually. The psychopath knows exactly how long to wait. You stood at that intersection perfectly balanced. Not because you wanted power, but because you got tired of being confused by people who were very sure of themselves. Pain taught you this lesson the hard way. The most dangerous people aren't violent. They're certain they're smarter, certain they're untouchable, certain no one is paying attention. So you paid attention quietly. You stopped interrupting lies, stopped correcting narratives, stopped trying to be understood by people invested in misunderstanding you. You let them talk past you, and in doing so, you outgrew them. Now look at what you've become. You don't rush to confront. You don't chase closure. You don't crave confession anymore. Because you already heard it, that's why unpredictability wraps around you like armor. They can't read your next move because you're not reacting to them anymore. You're reacting to truth, and truth doesn't argue. They feel the distance grow and mistake it for arrogance. But it's not pride, it's resolution. You settled something inside yourself they were never meant to touch. And that's the real shift. When you stop needing people to admit what they did. When you stop needing acknowledgement. When you stop needing justice to look dramatic. Because you understand something brutal and liberating, most people convict themselves. They just need someone quiet enough to hear it. And you were. So if they look at you now and feel uneasy, if they sense something watching without staring, if they feel exposed without knowing why, good. That means the performance worked. You didn't win by outsmarting them. You won by outlasting their ability to keep pretending. And now you move differently. Speak less, see more. The angel in you lets the world unfold. The demon in you remembers every detail. And the next time someone mistakes your silence for ignorance, the next time someone confesses because they think you're safe, you'll smile the same way. Soft, harmless, empty. Like the stage before the spotlight comes back on. Because the best actors don't seek applause. They let the audience destroy themselves, believing the show was never about them. Because once you understand that, something irreversible settles into your spine. A stillness, a weight, a calm that isn't peace, it's finality. You stop reacting to noise. You stop mistaking urgency for importance. You stop flinching when people raise their voices, because volume is what people use when substance runs out. And that terrifies them. They expect outrage. They expect confrontation. They expect you to do something once the truth is exposed. But you don't. You already did something when you stayed silent. That's the part they never see coming. That the real action already happened while they were busy talking. that the decision was made before they realized there was a decision to make. You learn that humans betray themselves in layers, first with jokes, then with hypotheticals, then with half-truths wrapped in humor, and finally, with relief. Relief is the tell. When someone exhales after saying too much, that's the moment. That's when you know the confession wasn't accidental. It was overdue, and you gave them permission to release it. That's not kindness. That's control without force. Pain taught you restraint, because restraint keeps you alive. Pain taught you patience, because impatience gets you exposed. Pain taught you that the smartest move isn't to reveal what you know. It's to decide when it matters that you know it. So you let time do the heavy lifting. You let people trip over their own narratives. You let consequences line up naturally. You let patterns repeat until even denial gets tired. And all the while, you stayed ordinary. Not impressive, not threatening, not memorable in the way they thought danger looked. That's what makes this lethal. Because danger, real danger, doesn't announce itself. It observes, it adapts, it waits until movement is unnecessary. They don't realize you're gone until you're already out of reach. They don't realize they were exposed until the environment changes around them. They don't realize they confessed until their own words come back through someone else's mouth, stripped of emotion, stripped of context, stripped of mercy. And suddenly they're scrambling, rewriting history, checking messages, replaying conversations. They start wondering why you don't ask questions anymore, why you don't seek clarification, why you don't engage the way you used to. They feel the absence. That's when the power shift completes. You didn't become colder. You became clearer. You didn't lose empathy. You relocated it inward. You stopped bleeding for people who mistook access for entitlement. And that's the saint-demon balance perfected. The saint in you understands why people lie. The demon in you understands why it no longer matters. You've crossed the line where explanation ends. Now when people talk, you hear subtext first. When they laugh, you hear tension. When they over-explain, you hear fear. You don't confront lies, you outgrow them. And that's the most brutal thing you can do to someone who thought they were smarter than you. Because nothing insults an ego like irrelevance, so keep the posture relaxed. Keep the voice neutral. Keep the smile unreadable. Let them keep underestimating the quiet. Let them keep mistaking calm for confusion. Let them keep performing. You already know how the story ends, not with an explosion, not with a showdown, not with applause, but with them realizing, far too late, that the person they thought was clueless was simply the only one disciplined enough to listen without flinching. And that realization, that's the real punishment. Because once someone understands they confessed everything while you were wide awake, they never feel safe again. Not around silence, not around kindness, not around someone who doesn't rush to speak. And you walk away lighter, sharper, untouched. Best actor, best memory, best restraint. Curtain long gone, only truth left standing. Because once you reach that point, there's nothing left to prove. You don't expose, you don't explain, you don't seek validation from people who already testified against themselves. You simply move on, carrying a truth so settled it no longer vibrates. They're the ones left restless, second-guessing every sentence they ever said near you, suspicious of silence, uncomfortable around calm. Because calm reminds them of you. And that's the final paradox. They never lost to confrontation. They lost to restraint. They lost to someone who didn't need to win loudly, Someone who understood that the cleanest victories happen without witnesses. So take the award, not for acting smarter than them, but for being disciplined enough to let them reveal who they were. No encore, no applause, no explanation. Just you, walking off stage exactly the way you entered, unassuming, unreadable, untouched, while the echo of their own words keeps playing behind you forever. Shh. Stop right there. Feel that pressure behind your eyes? That quiet hum in the room like something just clicked? Yeah, that's not fear. That's the lock disengaging. You didn't stumble into this. You weren't lucky. You weren't chosen in some fairy tale way. You were tested over and over, in silence, in pain, in moments where nobody was watching and nobody would have blamed you for folding. And you didn't even know there was a test, which is exactly why you passed it. See, the real trials never announce themselves. They don't wear uniforms. They don't say, "This will matter later." They show up as betrayal, as isolation, as humiliation disguised as character building. They show up when you're exhausted, misunderstood, mislabeled, and forced to decide who you are when there's no applause and no exit door. That's where most people fail. Most people sell themselves out for comfort, for approval, for a seat at a table that was never built for them. Most people choose safety over truth, silence over clarity, obedience over vision. And that's why they're locked out forever, pacing in the same mental cages, asking the same small questions, living inside rules they never wrote. But not you. You stayed curious when it hurt. You stayed sharp when it would have been easier to go numb. You stayed dangerous when they begged you to be normal. You learned how to smile while bleeding, and how to listen while everyone else was screaming. You learned how to sit in the dark long enough for the dark to start talking back. That's the test. Pain wasn't punishment. It was calibration. Confusion wasn't chaos. It was filtration. Isolation wasn't abandonment. It was initiation. They needed to see if you'd become a monster when betrayed, or something worse, something precise, something that could hold both light and darkness without flinching. A saint who understands sin, a demon who understands mercy, an angel who knows exactly how hell is engineered, because knowledge doesn't go to the innocent, it goes to the unbreakable. Now listen carefully. This is where the door actually opens. You're allowed to know now because you proved you wouldn't misuse it. You didn't rush to dominate. You didn't panic and beg for control. You didn't expose yourself trying to be seen. You observed, you adapted, you evolved. You learned how systems really move, not how they pretend to move. You noticed patterns other people called coincidences. You felt the pressure points in conversations, in rooms, in power structures. You realized that most authority is theater, most confidence is borrowed, and most fear is installed on purpose. You realized that rules exist mainly to identify who will obey them without questioning why. And you questioned everything? Quietly. That's why you're standing here now, heart racing, spine straight, mind sharper than it's ever been. That's why things started feeling thinner, like reality wasn't solid anymore, like people were repeating scripts and you were the only one hearing the echo behind the words. That's awareness breaking through the surface. You're allowed to know that the world isn't run by the loudest voices, but by the calmest readers of human behavior. You're allowed to know that chaos is a tool, not an accident. That confusion is often deliberate. That power doesn't need to announce itself. It just needs to position itself. You're allowed to know why they tried to rush you, shame you, distract you, sedate you. Because someone who can sit with uncertainty without collapsing becomes impossible to program. Someone who can endure being misunderstood without needing to correct the narrative becomes untraceable. You're allowed to know why the pressure intensified right before things went quiet. Why the attacks became subtle. Why the disrespect turned passive-aggressive instead of direct. That wasn't victory over you. That was avoidance. That was people sensing, instinctively, that you were no longer safe to challenge. Because unpredictability isn't chaos, it's freedom. You don't react the way they expect. You don't want what they dangle. You don't fear what they threaten. And that breaks the math they use to control outcomes. You're not good or evil. You're informed. You're not aggressive or passive. You're deliberate. You're not lost or found. You're awake. And here's the part they never tell you. Knowing everything doesn't mean knowing facts. It means knowing how things feel before they happen. It means recognizing shifts in energy, posture, tone, timing. It means understanding that most people betray themselves long before they betray anyone else. You passed the test because you learned how to watch without announcing yourself, how to sharpen without showing the blade, how to let them underestimate you long enough to reveal exactly who they are. That's why the curtain lifts now, not so you can rule, not so you can punish, but so you can see. See the game, see the loops, see the exits most people walk past because they're too busy arguing about the rules. See how pain forges vision, and vision creates leverage, and leverage creates options. You're not here to save the world or burn it down. You're here to move through it untouched, choosing when to be light, when to be dark, when to be silent, and when to speak in a way that rearranges rooms. So take a breath. Let it settle. This isn't the end of anything. It's the moment you realize you were never crazy. You were early. Never broken, just being shaped. Never lost, just being tested. And now you're allowed to know. Good. Stay still for a second. Don't rush this part. When the door opens, most people sprint inside like thieves afraid of being caught. You didn't. You paused. That pause? That's how I know you're different. Because knowing everything doesn't hit like fireworks. It hits like gravity. Slow, heavy, unavoidable. It settles into your chest and changes how you breathe. Suddenly the world feels quieter. Not because it is, but because you've stopped mistaking noise for meaning. Here's what you're starting to understand now, even if you can't put it into words yet. Most people are walking reactions, buttons wired by childhood, fear, hunger, validation. Push here, they rage. Pull there, they submit. Say the right word, they collapse. They call it personality. They call it fate. It's programming, cheap, predictable, reusable. You broke out of that, not because you were stronger, but because you were willing to suffer without explanation. You let confusion burn through you instead of running from it. You let loneliness strip you down instead of turning you cruel or desperate. And that's rare, because pain usually turns people into either beggars or bullies. But you became neither. You became aware. That's why the test kept escalating. Every time you adapted, it got quieter, subtler, more psychological. The obvious threats stopped working, so they switched to doubt, then to delay, then to erosion. They tried to make you question your memory, your instincts, your worth. They tried to convince you that nothing you felt was real, and you almost believed them. That's the part nobody talks about. You stood at the edge of self-betrayal more than once. You felt the pull to shrink, to soften, to become reasonable, palatable, normal. You felt how easy it would be to trade truth for peace, but something in you refused to kneel, not loudly, not heroically, quietly, relentlessly. That's why you're trusted now, because absolute knowledge in the hands of the insecure becomes tyranny, in the hands of the wounded becomes revenge, in the hands of the desperate becomes spectacle. But in the hands of someone who has stared into their own darkness and didn't flinch, that becomes precision. You're starting to see how duality actually works, not as a philosophy, as a weapon. Light makes people comfortable. Darkness makes them honest. You can switch between them without losing yourself. That's what makes you terrifying in ways you don't even need to use. You can walk into a room and disarm without speaking. You can let people project onto you and watch them expose their own intentions. You can say nothing and still steer outcomes, because you understand where fear lives in the human nervous system. You're not guessing anymore. You know why certain conversations suddenly changed tone when you entered. You know why some people became defensive for no reason. You know why others leaned in, confessed too much, or tried to impress you without realizing why. They felt it. That calm behind your eyes, that stillness that doesn't need permission, that sense that you're seeing through them, not at them. Here's the secret you're now allowed to hold. Power doesn't come from control. It comes from non-attachment. The moment you stopped needing outcomes, outcomes bent toward you. The moment you stopped chasing recognition, recognition found you sideways. Through silence, through curiosity, through whispers. The moment you stopped fearing loss, you became untouchable. That's when the rules changed, because systems rely on predictable hunger. They rely on fear of exclusion. They rely on your need to be liked, validated, rewarded. When that collapses, so does their leverage, and you collapsed it without even trying to. You learned how to hold pain without turning it outward. You learned how to be underestimated without correcting the record. You learned how to walk away from battles that would have drained lesser minds, not because you were afraid, but because you could already see the ending. That's foresight. That's elevation. That's the kind of intelligence that doesn't announce itself. It waits. Now, knowing everything doesn't mean you suddenly explain yourself. It means you stop explaining altogether. It means you let others reveal their level while you choose your altitude. It means you understand that silence, used correctly, is louder than accusation. You don't expose. You allow exposure. You don't dominate. You outlast. You don't react. You reposition. And the more you do this, the more you'll notice something unsettling. People start treating you differently without realizing why. Some will respect you instinctively. Some will fear you quietly. Some will try to anchor themselves to you. Some will disappear entirely. Let them. That's not loss. That's sorting. You passed the test because you didn't rush to become powerful. You became clear. And clarity is the one thing this world cannot fake, borrow, or steal. So move carefully now. Not cautiously. Deliberately. You can see the strings. You can feel the shifts before they happen. You can tell when something is off, when a door is about to close, when a new path is opening quietly to the side. Trust that. You earned this sight the hard way. Through nights nobody saw, through battles nobody validated, through versions of yourself that had to die, so this one could stand here. Steady, awake, and unafraid. This isn't your peak. It's your access level changing. And from here on out, nothing looks the same. Because you finally understand how everything really works. Something else is happening now, and you can feel it even if you haven't named it yet. The anger you used to carry doesn't burn the same way. The fear doesn't hook into you like it used to. Even the desire for revenge feels inefficient. Not because you've gone soft, but because you've gone sharp. You've outgrown emotional explosions. You've stepped into something colder, cleaner, far more dangerous. You're no longer driven by reaction. You're driven by understanding. And understanding changes everything. You're starting to see how people confuse morality with comfort. How they call things wrong when they're just inconvenient. How they call things evil when they can't control them. How they worship rules not because rules are sacred, but because rules protect them from having to think. You don't hate them for it. That's another sign you passed. Hatred is still attachment. Rage is still permission. The moment you stopped needing people to be different for you to be at peace, you stepped outside their jurisdiction. That's when you became impossible to punish. Because punishment only works on those who still crave approval. You see now why they tried to keep you busy, distracted, chasing goals that never satisfied, relationships that drained you, conflicts that kept you emotional and loud. They needed you reactive, because a reactive mind is a readable mind. But your mind went quiet, and quiet minds notice everything. You noticed how authority panics when you don't argue back, how manipulators unravel when you don't explain yourself, how insecure people grow hostile when they can't get a reaction out of you. You noticed how truth doesn't need volume. It needs timing. You learned timing. That's why you're no longer impressed by surface confidence. You can feel desperation under bravado. You can hear insecurity hiding behind jokes. You can see fear pretending to be arrogance. You read people the way others read headlines, quickly, effortlessly, without emotional investment. This is the gift they were afraid of you unlocking. Because once you see humans clearly, they lose their ability to intimidate you. Once you understand systems, they lose their mystery. Once you understand pain, it loses its power to control you. You don't glorify suffering anymore. You harvest it. Every betrayal sharpened your perception. Every setback taught you leverage. Every lonely night trained you to self-regulate, while others collapse without external validation. You built an internal spine while the world was busy teaching people how to perform. That's why you move differently now. You don't rush to speak. You don't rush to trust. You don't rush to prove. You let things reveal themselves. And here's the paradox that would break weaker minds. The more you know, the less you interfere. The more you understand, the less you need to assert. The more power you carry, the more selective you become about using it. That's not restraint out of fear. That's mastery. You've realized that most conflicts resolve themselves if you don't interrupt them. Most lies collapse if you don't expose them too early. Most enemies destroy themselves if you don't give them a worthy target. So you wait, not passively, strategically. You let time do what force never could. You let people overplay their hand. You let patterns complete themselves. And when you do move, it's subtle, surgical, irreversible. That's why your presence feels heavier now, not aggressive, inevitable. People sense it without understanding it. They feel watched even when you say nothing. They feel evaluated even when you smile. They feel exposed even when you're polite, because you're no longer meeting them where they want to be seen. You're meeting them where they hide. And the most dangerous part? You're not doing it consciously anymore. It's instinct, integrated, automatic. The test didn't just give you information. It rewired how you process reality. You're not switching masks. You're not playing roles. You're not pretending to be anything. You're simply aware. And awareness is the one thing no illusion survives. So understand this clearly now. You're not here to wake people up. You're not here to convince anyone. You're not here to drag truth into rooms that aren't ready for it. You're here to move cleanly through a world that lies to itself, untouched by its confusion, uninfected by its panic. Some will mistake your calm for arrogance. Some will mistake your silence for weakness. Some will sense the shift and feel threatened without knowing why. That's fine. You pass the test because you don't need to correct misinterpretations. You let them exist. You let people believe whatever keeps them predictable. Because predictability is not a flaw, it's a map. And you read maps better than anyone now. So keep your eyes open, keep your center steady, keep your movements intentional. You're operating on a different layer now, one where reaction is optional, fear is informational, and pain is no longer an enemy but a language you're fluent in. You didn't become dark, you became whole. And that's what they were really testing for all along. There's one more layer you're starting to touch now, and this is where most people would have broken if they hadn't been forged the way you were. You're realizing that clarity comes with a cost. Once you see how things actually work, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to pretending ignorance is innocence. You can't unlearn the way motives leak through tone, posture, timing. You can't unknow how often people choose comfort over truth and call it virtue. And that's lonely. Not in the dramatic way, not in the nobody understands me way. In the quiet, the surgical way where you're surrounded by people and still operating alone because your perception has outgrown the room. That loneliness, that's not a punishment. That's altitude. You're no longer starving for connection. You're selective about resonance. You don't want to be surrounded. You want to be aligned. And alignment is rare because it requires people to be honest with themselves before they can ever be honest with you. Most never get there. So you stop forcing closeness. You stop explaining depth to people who only swim on the surface. You stop shrinking your awareness to make others comfortable. And you stop apologizing for seeing what's obvious to you but terrifying to them. This is where the saint and the psychopath finally shake hands inside you. The saint understands compassion without weakness. The psychopath understands detachment without cruelty. Together, they create something unstoppable. You can care without clinging. You can observe without judging. You can act without rage. You can walk away without guilt. That balance is what makes you unpredictable, because you're not governed by impulse or image anymore. You're governed by truth. And truth doesn't yell. It doesn't rush. It doesn't beg to be believed. It waits until denial collapses under its own weight. That's why people keep exposing themselves around you. They overtalk. They overshare. They contradict themselves. They try to control the narrative too aggressively. They accuse you of things you never did. They reveal fears you never asked about. You don't provoke it. Your presence does. Because awareness acts like a mirror, and most people are terrified of their own reflection. They'd rather attack the glass than face what's staring back. You let them. Not because you're cruel, but because you understand something they don't. People teach you exactly who they are when you don't interrupt them. You don't chase truth anymore. You attract it. And the more you stabilize in this state, the more you'll notice time behaving differently around you. Decisions that used to take weeks clarify in minutes. Outcomes reveal themselves before action is required. You start sensing when to move, when to wait, when to disappear, and when to step forward just enough to alter the trajectory of everything. This isn't mysticism. It's pattern recognition at a level most minds never reach because they're too busy reacting. You earned this by surviving contradictions, by holding conflicting truths without forcing resolution, by accepting that you can be both wounded and dangerous, kind and lethal, patient and decisive, without needing to choose one identity to appease the world. That internal integration is what frees you. Because now, nobody can corner you with labels. Nobody can trap you in false binaries. Nobody can bait you into defending an image you no longer live inside. You don't need to be seen as good. You don't fear being seen as bad. You're interested in being effective. And effectiveness, when paired with restraint, becomes influence that doesn't announce itself. This is where you begin to understand the real meaning of knowing everything. It's not omniscience. It's orientation. You know where you stand. You know what you tolerate. You know what you don't touch. You know which battles are distractions and which moments are inflection points. You stop wasting energy proving things that time will expose anyway. You stop explaining decisions that are already correct. You stop waiting for permission from people who don't even have authority over themselves. Look at you, standing right there in the silence they tried to bury you in. Feel that? That pressure in the air? That's not fear anymore. That's recognition. They didn't whisper your name with admiration at first. They spat it. They carved it into rumors, wrapped it in warning labels, stamped it with one word they thought would end you: villain. And you felt it. You felt the doors close a little faster when you walked in. You felt the eyes linger too long, scanning for danger instead of understanding. You felt the way people rewrote your story behind your back, because facing the truth would have shattered the version of themselves they were protecting. But here's the part they never calculated. You didn't collapse under that label. You adapted to it. See, villains aren't born. They're forged. Forged in neglect. Forged in betrayal. Forged in the exact moment you realize that being good, quiet, obedient, and patient didn't save you. It only made you convenient. So you changed, not into a monster, into something honest. They called you dark because you stopped glowing for free. They called you dangerous because you stopped explaining yourself. They called you unstable because you no longer reacted the way they rehearsed in their heads. And that's when the paradox kicked in. The moment you embraced the shadow they pushed you into, you became clearer than anyone in the light. You see things now. Patterns, motives, weaknesses. You read rooms like crime scenes. You hear lies in the pauses between words. You feel energy shift before anyone else even notices something's wrong. That's not madness. That's evolution through pain. They wanted a saint, predictable, self-sacrificing, easy to guilt. But what they accidentally created was something far more useful. A survivor with a code. A thinker with teeth. An angel who learned how demons move. And here's where it gets uncomfortable for them. Because every system eventually needs someone like you. When the rules rot. When the hierarchy starts lying to itself. When the masks stop working. They don't call the heroes. They call the ones who already walked through hell and mapped it. You. They needed someone who wouldn't hesitate. Someone who could make ruthless decisions without flinching. Someone who wouldn't freeze when morality got blurry and the stakes turned ugly. They needed someone who understood that sometimes order only returns after chaos gets handled. Someone who knows that justice isn't always clean, but it's always precise. And that's why your presence unsettles people. You're living proof that their labels were wrong, that their judgment was lazy, that their fear dressed itself up as morality. They wanted you exiled, but exile turned you into an observer. They wanted you silenced, but silence sharpened your perception. They wanted you broken, but pressure taught you where you're unbreakable. Now look at them. They don't know how to talk about you anymore. You're not loud enough to dismiss, not reckless enough to trap, not weak enough to control. You're unpredictable, not because you're chaotic, but because you're no longer playing their game. And deep down, they feel it. That creeping realization that if things ever truly fall apart, if the polite lies stop holding, if someone needs to step in and do what others are too afraid to do, you're the one they'll look for. The villain they branded, the threat they misjudged, the shadow they tried to erase. Turns out you were the missing piece the whole time. Not because you're cruel, but because you're awake. You understand duality now. You know you can be kind without being weak, cold without being empty, ruthless when necessary, and still human underneath it all. That balance terrifies people who only know extremes, because they can't predict you, and they can't control what they don't understand. So let them stay confused. Let them keep rewriting your story in tones that make them feel safer. You're done defending yourself, done proving you're not that bad, done shrinking to fit into narratives built by people who never had to survive what you did. You don't need redemption arcs written by cowards. You don't need approval from spectators. You already crossed the line where fear turns into clarity, where pain turns into precision, where being misunderstood becomes a strategic advantage. They called you a villain, because heroes are easy to predict. But you're the contingency, the necessary disruption, the one who shows up when the old rules stop working, and whether they admit it or not. They don't just fear what you've become, they fear how much they'll need you when everything finally breaks. And here's the part they'll never say out loud, but you already know it. The moment you stopped chasing their approval, something in the atmosphere shifted. Not because you became louder, but because you became untouchable. You're no longer fueled by praise. You're no longer paralyzed by rejection. You don't move to be liked. You move to be accurate. And accuracy is terrifying in a world addicted to comforting lies. They keep asking themselves, what changed? Was it the way you stopped explaining your silence? The way your eyes don't rush anymore, like you already saw the ending? The way you don't react emotionally to threats that used to shake you? They sense it. You're not angry the way broken people are angry. You're calm the way storms get right before they choose a direction. And that's the thing about pain when it doesn't destroy you. It reorganizes you. It strips off the naive optimism, burns away the need to be understood, crushes the fantasy that fairness is automatic. What's left is someone dangerous in the quietest way possible. You don't need to dominate rooms. Rooms adjust to you. You don't need to announce power. People feel it in how you pause before speaking. You don't threaten, you calculate. They once thought branding you would limit you, but labels only work on people who need identities handed to them. You built yours in the dark, alone, with no applause, and that's why you move differently now. You don't rush to prove loyalty. You don't beg for alignment. You don't attach your worth to how comfortable others feel around you. Because you learned the most important rule they never teach out loud. Comfort is not truth, and truth is rarely gentle. They wanted you predictable, trainable, easily categorized. Instead, you became layered. You learned when to be soft, and when softness is a liability. You learned when to forgive, And when forgiveness is just permission for repetition, you learned when to stay, and when walking away is the most violent move possible. That wisdom didn't come from books. It came from scars that forced you to think instead of react. And now, people feel exposed around you, not because you interrogate them, but because you see through performances. They fidget, they over-explain, they project motives onto you that reveal more about them than you ever said. You let them, because you understand something most never will. When people don't understand you, they tell on themselves trying to define you. They'll say you're cold. What they mean is, you stopped bleeding for free. They'll say you're ruthless. What they mean is, you no longer hesitate when patterns repeat. They'll say you changed. What they mean is, the version of you they could manipulate no longer exists. And deep down, beneath the judgment, beneath the gossip, beneath the moral posturing, there's respect, unspoken, uncomfortable, involuntary, because you survived what breaks most people without turning into what hurt you. That's the real contradiction. That's the duality they can't reconcile. You can stand in darkness without becoming it. You can understand cruelty without worshiping it. You can be capable of destruction and still choose restraint. Not because you're weak, but because you're aware. That awareness is the final form. You don't need to prove you're good. You don't need to prove you're dangerous. You already know you're both. And that balance gives you leverage no label ever could. So let them keep calling you the villain in their stories. Villains make sense when people don't want to admit they needed someone to do what they were too afraid to do themselves. History doesn't remember who was polite. It remembers who was necessary. And you? You didn't ask to become necessary. They forced you into it by underestimating you, by misjudging you, by pushing you far enough that you had to evolve or disappear. You chose evolution. And now you walk with the kind of quiet certainty that only comes from knowing you can survive without permission. They branded you a villain because they couldn't control what you became. But when the moment comes, when things fall apart and someone has to step forward without flinching, they'll look for you, not with applause, not with apologies, with relief, because the one they feared was the one who could handle the truth when it finally mattered. And even then, even when they feel that relief, they won't say thank you. They'll just exhale. Because gratitude requires humility, and humility is expensive for people who built their identity on being right about you. You've noticed it already. The way conversations die when you enter, the way jokes stop mid-sentence, the way confidence drains from people who used to talk over you. It's not because you're intimidating on purpose. It's because you're no longer seeking permission to exist. You stand there unarmed and still feel like a threat. That's what happens when someone can't be shamed anymore. They tried shame first. Remember, they tried to make you feel like your intensity was wrong, your depth was too much, your questions were inconvenient, your refusal to play dumb was disruptive. So they painted you dark, dangerous, unstable, because if they could convince others you were the problem, they wouldn't have to examine the rot in their own systems. But here's the irony they choke on every time they think about you. You didn't destroy anything. You simply stopped pretending it wasn't broken. You didn't become ruthless. You became precise. You didn't lose empathy. You learned where empathy was being exploited. You didn't abandon morality. You outgrew childish versions of it. That's what scares them most. Not that you can fight, but that you can choose not to, and still win. You don't need chaos to function. You don't crave destruction. You don't burn things just to watch them fall. You're far more dangerous than that. You wait. You observe. You let people expose themselves while trying to figure you out. Because you understand timing now. You understand leverage. You understand that silence, placed correctly, can dismantle an entire narrative. They never saw that coming. They thought if they isolated you, you'd implode. Instead, isolation taught you self-containment. They thought if they denied you validation, you'd chase it harder. Instead, you learned how to generate it internally. They thought if they provoked you, you'd snap. Instead, you learned how to pause. And pauses terrify people who rely on reactions. That pause is where your power lives now. You don't rush to defend yourself. You don't rush to correct lies. You don't rush to prove innocence in courts that already decided the verdict. You let time do the work. Because time has a way of exposing who was acting and who was built for pressure. And pressure, that's your native environment now. You were baptized in it, shaped by it, refined by moments where no one came to save you. You didn't break. You recalibrated. You stopped hoping the world would be fair. And in doing so, you became far more effective within it. That doesn't make you cruel. It makes you awake. You know now that not everyone deserves access to you. Not every fight deserves your energy. Not every accusation deserves a response. You learned the hierarchy of effort, and you stopped wasting yours on people who confuse noise for power. That's why they feel small around you now. Not because you dominate, but because you're no longer competing. You don't need to win arguments. You don't need to be right out loud. You don't need to be seen doing anything. Your results speak quietly, and that quiet screams. They feel it when they try to provoke you and nothing lands. They feel it when they gossip and you don't flinch. They feel it when they escalate and you don't chase. Because escalation only works on people still playing the game. You left the board. You became the variable they can't account for. And deep inside, they know it. They know that if things ever truly collapse, if someone has to step into uncertainty without losing their mind, it won't be the loudest voice. It won't be the cleanest image. It won't be the most acceptable choice. It'll be you, the one who already survived social death, the one who already walked through character assassination, the one who already lived with being misunderstood and came back sharper. They branded you a villain because they couldn't classify you. They feared you because you didn't need them. They resisted you because you reflected everything they were avoiding in themselves. And now they don't know whether to fear you or hope you're on their side when it counts. That's the final transformation. Not being loved, not being hated, being necessary. And the most unsettling part for them, you didn't do any of this for revenge. You didn't rise to punish. You didn't evolve to dominate. You evolved because disappearing wasn't an option. You stayed human in a world that rewarded masks. You stayed aware in a world that thrived on denial. You stayed standing when it would have been easier to fold. So let them keep their stories. Let them keep their labels. Let them keep pretending they understand you. You don't need them to. You already crossed the threshold where identity stops being something given and becomes something chosen. They needed someone who could walk through darkness without losing direction, someone who could make hard decisions without becoming hollow, someone who could see the truth and still act. They thought they created a villain. What they actually created was the one who shows up when pretending stops working. And whether they're ready or not, that moment is always closer than people think. And here's the truth that settles in once you've lived long enough in that space they pushed you into. You stop craving closure. You stop needing vindication. You stop fantasizing about apologies that would never be honest anyway. Because you realized something colder and far more liberating. Most people don't misunderstand you by accident. They misunderstand you on purpose, because understanding you would force them to change. So you stopped chasing being seen. You started seeing. You saw how quickly loyalty dissolves when convenience disappears. You saw how morality gets flexible when power feels threatened. You saw how people who preach empathy panic when they're no longer the center of it. And instead of hardening into bitterness, you sharpened into clarity. You don't hate them. You don't need to. Hate ties you emotionally to people who already took enough from you. You're past that stage. Now you operate from something quieter, something colder, something precise. You understand the anatomy of betrayal now. You recognize the early symptoms, the subtle distancing, the passive concern, the questions that aren't really questions, but probes. You see when someone's tone changes because they're no longer sure where they stand with you. That uncertainty is new to them. They were used to knowing exactly how to push you, exactly how far they could go, exactly which buttons would make you over-explain, over-give, overstay. Those buttons don't work anymore, and that scares people who built their confidence on access to you. You didn't become closed off. You became selective. There's a difference, and it's one only evolved people understand. You learned that transparency without discernment is self-sabotage, that generosity without boundaries is a liability, that loyalty without reciprocity is just self-erasure dressed up as virtue. So you recalibrated. You started listening more than you spoke. You started watching patterns instead of promises. You started valuing consistency over chemistry. And with every adjustment, your presence changed. People feel it before they understand it. They sense that you're no longer available for manipulation, that you don't react on cue, that you don't rush to fix discomfort that isn't yours to carry. You let silence stretch now. You let people sit with their own words. You let tension exist without rushing to neutralize it. That's not cruelty, that's mastery. Only someone who's been blamed unfairly learns the power of restraint like this. Only someone who's been mischaracterized understands how dangerous words can be when they're spoken carelessly. Only someone who's been isolated learns how to stand without leaning on external validation. You became your own anchor. And once that happens, labels lose their grip. Villain becomes noise. Threat becomes projection. Too much becomes code for no longer controllable. You don't internalize it anymore. You analyze it. You see who benefits from calling you that. You see who needs you minimized to feel secure. You see who's afraid of what happens if others start questioning the story they were told about you. Because stories are power, and you slipped out of the one they wrote. That's why they feel unsettled around you. You're not hostile. You're not submissive. You're not asking to be let back in. You're simply standing, whole, unashamed, unbothered. That kind of autonomy disrupts systems built on dependency. And don't think they don't notice. They notice every time you don't defend yourself, every time you don't clarify a lie, every time you let an accusation die from lack of oxygen. They mistake that restraint for indifference. They're wrong. It's discernment. You know which battles reveal truth, and which ones only feed egos. You know when to step in, and when letting things collapse is the cleanest outcome. You know now that not every fire needs extinguishing. Some fires expose what was always flammable. That's why they're uneasy. You're not reactive enough to predict, not emotional enough to trap, not desperate enough to bait. You're operating from a level that doesn't need theatrics. And here's the final irony they can't digest. You're not trying to overthrow anything. You're not chasing dominance. You're not seeking revenge. You're not building a cult of validation around yourself. You're simply refusing to lie anymore about who you are, about what you see, about what you're willing to tolerate. That refusal alone is revolutionary in a world built on performance. So let them keep their distance, let them whisper, let them speculate. Distance gave you perspective. Whispers taught you discernment. Speculation revealed who was watching you for the wrong reasons. You're not here to be liked. You're not here to be understood by everyone. You're not here to fit into moral caricatures designed by people who never walked your path. You're here because you survived becoming the villain in someone else's story, without letting it turn you into one. And that is the kind of power no label can touch. You don't need to announce it. You don't need to flex it. You don't need to explain it. You just move. With intention, with awareness, with a calm that only comes from knowing you already faced the worst version of being misunderstood and lived. And once you've lived through that, everything else feels negotiable.